presentations, where the system will just know what we're trying to do somehow. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us here today. So we are here to tell you about the latest regulatory changes affecting buildings in DC and what this means for you and your properties. I believe many of you received letters from DOE, Department of Energy and Environment, recently about how benchmarking requirements affect your buildings. So we'll dive into some of the specifics of these regulations, what you need to know, how it affects you, why it matters, how to do it, and resources that are available to help. We'll certainly open up to Q&A at the end, but feel free to put questions in the chat throughout and we'll monitor as we go. So next slide. So before we begin, and while I have everyone's undivided attention, I just want to say thank you to our members who help support our mission and allow us to deliver content like this and a whole host of other resources to support building performance improvements, which of course starts with benchmarking. Next slide. So my name is Lindsey Falasca. I'm the director of the Building Innovation Hub. I'm also joined here today with Theresa Backhus, the Hub's associate director. And to provide you with the bulk of the information today is JoAnna Saunders with DOE, who is the benchmarking guru and technical wizard who will be able to answer any of your questions that you guys have. So we're excited to have her with us. Next slide. So before we really begin to the meat of the presentation, I just want to take a minute to introduce the Building Innovation Hub, since we are a new-ish entity here in DC, created specifically to support the local building industry navigate new building regulations, like explaining benchmarking requirements and helping you understand what it all means and why it's important. Next slide. So we are providing resources, tools, and educational events like this one to help you track and report your building's performance and help you make improvements to your buildings. And we are certainly here to help you overcome today's hurdles, but our job is to also help everyone look at the long-term implications of decisions and feel empowered and confident in them as we work to improve buildings. And so with that sort of brief introduction, I will now turn it over to JoAnna, who will talk to you about benchmarking. Take it away, JoAnna.
Thank you so much, Lindsey and Theresa, for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is JoAnna Saunders, and I am the Energy Benchmarking Program Manager at the District Department of Energy and Environment. So I oversee all of our day-to-day operations for energy benchmarking, which is a program that has been in effect for quite a while, but this webinar specifically is focused for those smaller buildings that will be reporting their data for the very first time next year. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video, but I'll be back on at the end to answer any questions, and we can jump right in. So quickly, just want to go over some of our learning objectives today, mainly for you all to understand what energy benchmarking is and its importance. Know when your building is required to report benchmarking data and understanding your regulatory requirements in regards to energy benchmarking. And then we're also going to cover Energy Star Portfolio Manager, do a quick tutorial how to enter required data and how to submit that data to DOE. So first, with some context setting, the mayor of DC has a vision that's called Sustainable DC, which is to make DC the healthiest, greenest, most livable city in the country. So what does that mean from an environmental perspective? So we have this overarching plan that we call Sustainable DC, which is what commits the District of Columbia to zero carbon by 2050. So that's our big end goal, but there are a number of smaller, or I shouldn't say small, there's still large goals that are happening sooner and that are nestled within that Sustainable DC plan. So there's two big plans under that umbrella Sustainable DC plan. There's Climate Ready DC and Clean Energy DC. Climate Ready DC focuses on climate adaptation. So that's, we know climate change is happening, we're already experiencing the impacts of it. How do we readily adapt? And then Clean Energy DC focuses on climate mitigation. So how do we actually reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? How do we cut our energy use? And how do we transition to renewable energy? And so that is where we're focusing in on. So we're going to zoom in even more on Clean Energy DC, which is essentially a roadmap to that carbon neutrality by 2050. And then the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Amendment Act of 2018 is the actual law that says, here are the requirements that are going to get us to that end goal. So related to buildings is energy benchmarking and building energy performance. So the first one, which is relevant to today's webinar, is that the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act actually lowers the minimum building square footage that is required to benchmark over time. So for the past nearly decade, it's covered all buildings over 50,000 square feet, but with the passage of Clean Energy DC, that threshold size is dropping down. It also established the building energy performance standards, which we won't go into depth on today. We'll cover it a little bit, but important to know that that's how they were created. Benchmarking and the building energy performance standards, especially crucial for all these clean energy DC and sustainable DC goals, because buildings account for 75% of DC's total greenhouse gas emissions. So if we are ever going to reach carbon neutrality, we really need to address buildings. And so that's why energy benchmarking is incredibly important, and that benchmarking data feeds directly into the building energy performance standards. So what exactly is energy benchmarking? And again, why is it so important? Energy benchmarking means tracking a building's energy and water use and using a standard metric to compare buildings' performance against past performance and to its peers nationwide. So you can compare your own building to itself from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last year, and you're also able to compare your building's performance to similar buildings all across the nation. But energy benchmarking helps building owners or managers understand their building's energy use because it can provide baseline information. It allows you to track changes over time. It also helps us at the Department of Energy and Environment plan how to reduce district building energy use. Essentially, we need to understand how buildings are operating first in order to implement the most effective policies. And also, energy benchmarking helps drive market transformation. So we equate benchmarking to fuel efficiency or nutrition facts, where if you're making an informed decision, you're going to a dealership, buying a car, you're in the grocery store looking at food options, you might look at the fuel efficiency or the nutrition facts so that you have all the information in front of you so that you can make the most informed decision. So energy benchmarking is if you are looking to occupy a building, purchase a building, you can use that building energy performance data that comes from energy benchmarking to inform your decisions. So some more specifics about the benchmarking regulatory requirements. The initial benchmarking requirement was established in the Clean and Affordable Energy Act of 2008. So I said it's been around for quite a while now, and it requires all private buildings over 50,000 square feet and all public buildings over 10,000 square feet to report their annual energy and water usage. And those buildings began reporting for the first time in 2013. The annual reporting deadline is April 1st every year. All of our reporting is done through the US EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is an online tool used to track energy and water performance. There are penalties for failure to comply with this law. So failure to meet the reporting requirements can result in a fine of up to $100 per day for every day that the building is not in compliance. And when we say compliance, that means not only submitting your benchmarking report, but submitting complete and accurate data that DOEE has confirmed as compliant. And then again, most specifically relevant to this webinar is the fact that that size threshold is dropping down. So in 2022, next year, buildings 25,000 to 50,000 square feet are going to be reporting for the very first time, and they're going to be reporting their calendar year 2021 data. So that's happening much sooner than later. It's about 6 months away. So that's why we're starting to do this education now and make sure all buildings within that size category are well set up. I also wanted to flag that the threshold will be dropping down again in another few years. So in 2025, all buildings 10,000 to 25,000 square feet are going to be required to report, and they'll be reporting their calendar year 2024 data. Also, like I mentioned, the focus of this webinar is not on the building energy performance standards, but certainly want to mention it because it is relevant. So the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Amendment Act requires the establishment of a building energy performance standards, or what we call BEPS, that sets a minimum threshold for energy performance that will be no lower than the local median Energy Star score by property type or an equivalent metric. So the standards have been established. They were established on January 1st of this year. However, this only applies to private buildings and private buildings over 50,000 square feet and public buildings over 10,000 square feet. In subsequent years, smaller buildings will be subject to the building energy performance standards, but not for a little while. So that benchmarking data that we're talking about and that we're collecting is used to actually set the building energy performance standards and create baseline and performance periods for buildings that do not meet the standards and have to enter a compliance cycle. The Clean Energy DC Omnibus Amendment Act also established a brand new benchmarking requirement, which is third-party data verification. So while DOEE does its own data quality checks and determines whether or not a report is compliant, starting in 2024, all buildings will need to get their benchmarking data verified by a third party, which means not someone who is employed by the building or someone who is doing the benchmarking report. And that will need to be submitted every 3 years from 2024 onward. And you can see there's a little table here that provides a snapshot of both when the reporting requirements begin and when the data verification requirements begin, depending on your building's size. And again, just wanted to quickly mention that BEPS is currently only covering those private buildings over 50,000 square feet. However, we anticipate future BEPS cycles will be covering those smaller buildings. So following the same logic as the benchmarking requirements, eventually those buildings over 25,000 square feet will be subject to BEPS. And then in the future, all buildings over 10,000 square feet. Okay, so now going into a little bit more of nitty-gritty of benchmarking. This slide right here is more of a reference slide. All of the slides and the recording will be available after this webinar, so you can refer back to this. But this just outlines at the highest level all the steps necessary to benchmark your building and come into compliance with the regulatory requirements. So we'll be going over a number of these points, but if you have any questions on any of these, of course, we're happy to provide more detailed instruction and assistance. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is switching over to a little bit of a live demo, showing everyone Portfolio Manager, going over some of the basic navigational tools, how to enter data. So I'll be switching over momentarily. Okay. So as I mentioned, all of our energy benchmarking, reporting, tracking is done through the US EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. So if you were to go to energystar.gov/building/benchmark, you would be taken to this page, which gives an overview: what is benchmarking, what is Portfolio Manager, provide you with some good high-level information, as well as a lot of resource links. But you can also see a direct link to log into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So if you've never benchmarked a property before, your first step is going to be creating an account. So you can see right here, very simple process, much like creating any other online profile where you enter username, password, information. I will note here that is incredibly important that the contact information, so this about yourself that you enter, is an email address that is regularly checked and maintained. And I will also say recoverable if there is staff changeover. DOEE sends all of our email correspondence electronically to the emails associated with your Portfolio Manager account, one of which is the account owner email, which is exactly what you would be entering here. We recommend, if you can, to use a more generic company email or an email account that can be accessed by multiple parties rather than an individual, just in case in the future, someone else needs to do the benchmarking, We certainly don't want you to lose years worth of data just because you're not able to access the account. We also don't want you to miss any important correspondence from us because they're not going to an email inbox that's regularly checked. So that's an important thing to flag here. It'll ask you to fill out all this information. You'll want to make sure that this section here that says, do you want your account name to be searchable, is selected as yes, because you will need to be sharing your account with DOEE in the future. So once you confirm all this, create your account, you'll be taken to actually log in. So this is, this is one way that you can log in this view, or you can go directly to portfoliomanager.energystar.gov/pm/login. So once we sign in, this is the portfolio view dashboard that you will see every time that you log in to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So you can see there's these high level tabs up here, these four that say My Portfolio, Sharing, Reporting, Recognition. We're mostly going to be working in this My Portfolios tab, which is also what it defaults to. You can see it lists the number of properties you have. If you have just created your account for the first time, this will say 0, and there will be nothing listed here because you have not yet created any properties. You can see here, I have 4 properties in my portfolio. They're all labeled here. I can search if I've got a number of them. There's all these drop-down menus if you wanted to rearrange how this is displayed. So there's also some helpful links right here on the sidebar so you can get your energy metrics and a snapshot. There's some helpful links right here under Manage Portfolio, such as your ability to transfer ownership of a property, to upload multiple properties at once, to set up portfolio baselines and targets. So this is the main portfolio level view. If we go into one of our properties, let's go into this test office building. This is now considered the property level view. And so you'll see you have those same 4 tabs that we did on the main page, but now we also have a separate set of tabs that are unique to this property. So the name of my property is Test Office. We're getting a snapshot of its energy performance right here because we're on the summary page, and we'll navigate through some of these other tabs in just a moment, but just wanted to note that there's 2 levels of those tabs, and if you ever want to go back to your main page, there's 2 ways to do that. You can click My Portfolio or this big logo up in the upper left-hand corner. That's always going to take you back to the main page. Okay, so we're going to go over some of the basics of adding a property. So we're now back at that main Portfolio Manager page. Under this left-hand bar that says Properties, you can see this button. It says Add a Property. Let's get started. So the most important thing is going to ask you, what is your property type? So there are a number of predetermined Portfolio Manager property types. I would say 99% of the time, buildings in the district fall into one of these categories. We very rarely have instances where a building is, so unique or different that it doesn't fall into any of these. However, if you think that your building might not fit into any of these categories, please reach out to us. We'll help you determine what is the most applicable property use type. For the purposes of this webinar, because we know that there are a lot of small multifamily buildings, we're going to scroll down to this lodging/residential section and select multifamily housing just for the purposes of this demonstration. It's also going to ask you, how many buildings do you consider part of your property? Again, vast majority of the time, it's going to be considered 1. I will take a moment to note here that we do know that there are a number of what we call garden style apartments in the district. So there might be a number of smaller buildings that are all scattered on the same plot, all considered part of the same complex. So your mind might think that there's more than one because it includes multiple structures, but for the purposes of benchmarking, if those buildings share any common energy or water meters, in our mind, that's considered 1 property. So again, if you have questions about that, we're happy to work with you, but most of the time you're going to be selecting this 1. And again, it should be an existing building because it's covered by the benchmarking law, and it should be defaulted there. And we're not going to go through all these, we're going to quickly fill it out, but it's just going to ask you basic information about your property. You can name it, anything you want, but we recommend it's something that is easy for you to identify, especially if you're benchmarking more than one building, and it'll ask you to put in all the basic information about the property. So we're just going to call this test apartment 2. We're going to say it's at that location, District of Columbia. You put the year built. Gross floor area is one of the more important metrics. We're going to cover it a little bit later, but this is the measure of your total property floor area. And if you want a more detailed definition, you can notice some of these fields are highlighted blue, which means if you hover over it, it's actually going to give you a pop-up definition. You can also get a more detailed definition by clicking on it, which will take you to the glossary definition in Portfolio Manager. So really helpful tool. If you notice anything that's highlighted in this blue, hover over it or click in to get a more detailed explanation. So we're going to say our building is 42,000 square feet, right? It's in between 25 and 50,000. We're going to say it has 1,000 square feet of irrigated area. Make sure it's not a default value. And then the occupancy, it's 100% occupied. And most buildings are fully occupied, but I also will note that the occupancy is a percentage of your property's gross floor area that is both occupied and operational. Okay, so the most important part of this step is the standard IDs section. When you are reporting your building to the Department of Energy and Environment, we ask that you report your DC Real Property Unique ID. That is what we call it. It is most often the square suffix lot number from your DC property tax records, but it is essentially the number that uniquely identifies your building. DOEE every year publishes what we call a covered building list that lists all of the buildings that are covered by the benchmarking law. It states the building size and also that DC Real Property Unique ID. So I highly recommend that if you are unsure, that list is your best reference point because we pull it every year. It's published months in advance of that April 1st reporting deadline. And it is the most up-to-date and accurate number, and that is how we track your submissions. So from this standard IDs drop-down menu, you should see it's one of the, in the top section, it says District of Columbia Real Property Unique ID. You would select that, and you would enter, it's typically an 8-digit number separated by a dash. So square, suffix, lot. We're using a fake one here just for sake of example. If you own a condominium, this is slightly different because it actually uses a regime number. But again, at the end of the day, you should reference our covered building list, or you can reference mytax.dc.gov to find the tax records. Last question on this area is if any of these questions apply, such as if your property includes parking, swimming pool, retail stores. I'm going to say that it includes parking. Parking should never be included as part of your gross floor area, but you can report it separately if it also is metered on the same meter. Okay, so this is where you would really get into the details of your specific property. As I mentioned before, gross floor area is one of the most important property use details. It is directly related to your Energy Star score because Portfolio Manager will take all of your energy consumption and compare it with your property use details, including the gross floor area, to determine your score. You can see here, similar to how I mentioned that all of the highlighted blue is linked, and if you hover over it, it gives you a definition. Another thing that you will notice here are these blue stars. Anything that has a blue star next to it means that it goes into your Energy Star score, which is the 1 to 100 score that tells you how your building is performing relative to other buildings nationwide. So 50 being the national median, anything above a 50 means you're performing in the upper 50% of buildings nationwide. Anything below 50 means you're performing in the lower 50% of buildings nationwide. and it gives you a good sense of how your building is doing relative to others. And so any of these property use details here that are starred are incredibly important. They need to be based on complete and accurate, up-to-date information. So as I mentioned, DOE publishes a covered building list every year, and we use the square footage that is reported by the Office of Tax and Revenue. However, we highly, highly recommend that you consult any actual building or architectural plans to determine the exact square footage of your buildings. Because it's so heavily factored in your energy metrics, you want to make sure that you are getting the most accurate Energy Star score possible. So while the Office of Tax and Revenue can be a good starting point, in order to make sure that your property is being fairly evaluated, you should make sure that this gross floor area that you're reporting is actually a true measure of your building. Again, if you're unsure about what information should be included or how to calculate that or what plans to look for, please reach out to us. We're happy to help verify, but wanted to call out that that is a really important and crucial step. We're not going to fill out all of these here, but I will just call out a few more components of this view. You can see that there's this current as of column, which defaults to the year built date. So that means that when the building was built in 1900, it was 42,000 square feet. It has not been renovated. There's been no additions. There have been no demolitions. So it has a current as of date of 1900. This would only be updated if your property has undergone some major renovation. But if it hasn't, you should keep it defaulted to the year built date. So depending on your property use type, these property use details will look different. As you can recall, I selected this was a multifamily property, and so these are all of the property use details that are required for a multifamily property. But it'll look different depending on the property use type that you enter. I also mentioned that parking is entered separately. So again, related to the gross floor area of your building, that total should never include any parking area. It doesn't matter if the parking garage is underneath your building and seemingly is physically connected. Parking is always reported as its own square footage and not as the building square footage. Okay, so I'm actually just going to navigate back to our portfolio and jump into an existing setup property. Some other things I wanted to call out here are, you can see your basic property use information, such as the address of your building, the year built date, and also the portfolio manager property ID. So this is different from the DC real property unique ID. I know that there's a lot of common words there. It can get a little bit confusing, but to make the distinction, the DC real property unique ID is that 8-digit number that's reported that helps us identify the actual plot of land that your building is on. And that's what we use for all of our reporting and pairing purposes. The portfolio manager ID is the unique identifier that portfolio manager has given you to help you identify your property within your own portfolio. So wanted to call that out as well. All right, so now that we have established our property, we need to enter energy and water data. So as I mentioned, there's all of these sub tabs here. The details tab is where you would see all of the information that you entered. We're looking at a different property now. We're looking at an office building. If you click this little down arrow, you can see these are all the property use details associated with an office building. Again, those stars, they tell you this use detail is used to calculate the 1 to 100 score. So those all need to be real, not temporary or default values. And you can see the current as of date matches the year built date here. Okay, so now we're going to navigate over to the energy tab. We typically expect buildings in the district to have at least one type of energy source. Almost every building in the district should have at least electricity. Most will have both electricity and natural gas. Of course, some buildings might have bulk fuel, such as fuel oil. A lot more properties now have solar coming online. So, this might look a little bit different depending on your specific building, but in your most clear-cut cases, we expect to see at least one electric grid meter and one natural gas meter. So if you wanted to add a new meter, you can see we have two that are already established here, but you can also see this button that says add a meter. It's going to ask you what type of energy you want to track. So let's say we're adding another electric meter. Most of the time it's going to be grid purchased, but you can also see this is where you would start to enter your solar. If you had solar, I don't know if DC has any on-site wind turbines, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. And we're going to have 1 meter set up and click get started. So this is where you're starting off. The most important 2 pieces of information to add here are the units and the date the meter became active. So to edit this, it says click table to edit. You can see if I click in here, all of these fields now become editable. So for electricity, we're always doing our reporting in kilowatt hours, and the date that the meter became active. There's a few options here. What I would suggest is making the meter active date equal this first date of whatever your first entry is going to be. So let's say we're reporting calendar year 2021 data, which is what all of these buildings, 25 to 50,000 square feet, will be reporting for the first time. So let's say that our meter became active on the 1st of January, 2021. Great. And we'll click create meter. So you've got this banner up here. It says your meter has been created. If you have energy consumption information, you can enter it below. So this is where you would actually start to enter your energy use data. And you have this button here that says click to add an entry. You'd have a start and end date. We made the meter active on the 1st of January, 2021. So I'd enter 1/1/21. The great thing is Portfolio Manager automatically creates a monthly entry for you. And it'll do this for every month. So if you see this add another entry, we're already in October, so theoretically we should have at least 9 months of data. And if we keep clicking add another entry, it'll just automatically pick up from where the last entry left off and add all of the necessary monthly entries that you would need. I will also note that you should enter the start and end dates of whatever is listed on your utility bill. For this example, we're in a perfect world where I'm being billed on the 1st of the month every single month, but the likelihood of that actually happening is fairly low. So if you are billed from the 12th of the month to the 12th of the month, the 28th to the 28th, you should be entering the exact bill dates, because if you don't, that could mess with the ability for a portfolio manager to properly weather normalize your data. I will also note that if your start and end dates fall in the middle of the month, you will likely need to add more than 12 entries in order to span the entire calendar year. So for you to get an Energy Star score and for you to get all of your energy metrics to be in compliance with DOEE, your bills must span from the 1st of January through the 31st of December of the month being reported. Of the year being reported. So in this case, 2021. But if my bill was from December 15th of 2020 through January 15th, 2021, that's what I should be entering here, so that at the end of the day, we have consecutive data from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. So this is where also you would enter your kilowatt hours. You should be entering exactly what is on your PEPCO bill. If you're doing natural gas, it's likely from your Washington gas bill, and fill it out through the end of the year. Obviously, we're still in 2021. We don't yet have 12 months of calendar year data, but if you are wanting to get ahead and establish your properties and start entering data, you don't need to have that 12 full months yet. You should be regularly going in and updating it as you receive those bills. And we anticipate you are receiving your last bill for December, probably sometime around January or February of next year, plenty of time before the April 1st deadline to get your year's worth of data in there. I will also take this moment to call out another really important component of the energy being reported. So DOEE requires whole building energy data. That means that you're reporting all of the energy consumption associated with that building. This is especially important to note for those who own or manage a building with individually metered tenants, and that's both residential and non-residential, though we mostly see this in residential settings. So let's say you have a condo building with individually metered tenants. Everyone is responsible for paying their own electricity and natural gas bill, and as the building owner or manager, you are only paying the common area meter. That does not mean that you are only reporting the common area energy consumption. So the next logical question might be, well, then how do I access that tenant data? I'm not the one paying the bills. Both PEPCO and Washington Gas have tools for you to request that data directly, and they provide it in a total aggregated form in order to protect tenant privacy. So if you have more than 5 individual electricity or natural gas meters at your property, you can go directly to PEPCO or Washington Gas and provide them with the meter list for your property, and they're going to provide you back one total number that encapsulates the whole building energy usage each month. We don't have time to go into the specifics of that, though DOE has a recorded webinar on how to establish, how to collect those meters, how to request that information, and how to establish the sharing connection between PEPCO and Washington Gas. We also have a one-pager with all the necessary links, and that will be linked towards the end of the presentation. But wanted to call that out because if you own a building that has more than 5 meters, it will likely be something you will be taking advantage of. DC Water does not offer whole building water data, but that's mostly because the vast majority of buildings in the district only have a single water meter. Okay, so jumping back over, we're not going to complete this out just for time's sake. We're not going to save, but we're going to go back to our test office, and just so I can quickly show you what that process would look like for the water metrics. Very similar. You would click add a meter, select which type of water you want to track. Same thing here. You would select your units and the date the meter became active. For water, it would be gallons. And again, the meter active date would be the 1st of January, 2021. Same exact process where you click and add your entries. It'll automatically calculate, and you can go all the way through. You can also delete any entries. If for some reason you added too many, you can select them, delete them. There's a lot of options here. There is also the ability to upload bulk data through a spreadsheet. It is a little bit finicky, so I oftentimes do encourage you to just do the manual entry unless you have a lot of meters, but Portfolio Manager has specific resources on how to do bulk uploads for meter data. Okay, so we're not going to save those changes. All right, so just a few more things to cover while we're looking at this property view. So something you might notice is this box in the upper right-hand corner. You can see here right now it's displaying as an Energy Star score. So as I mentioned, the Energy Star score, it's a measure of how well your property is performing relative to similar properties when normalized for climate and all those operational characteristics, so those property use details that we enter. Another common metric that's used is the site and source energy use intensity, which is the total amount of fuel that's required to operate your property divided by your property's gross floor area. And so what's really great about Portfolio Manager is you're able to view a number of different metrics. It defaults to Energy Star score up here, and it's typically what most folks are interested in knowing. But if you click the edit button here, you can change the metric and choose from any number of metrics here. So like I said, you can choose your weather normalized site EUI. We can see what that looks like, and it actually gives you an indication of how you compare to the median. So this building is performing pretty well. It had an Energy Star score of 77, and its EUI is 33% lower than the median. So a fairly well-performing building, all things considered. Okay, back to the main page, just a few more things I wanted to call out. The most important one being this little button here that says help. So in the upper right-hand corner, you would see your username, you've got your account settings, notifications, etc. But if you click this help button, it takes you to this page where Portfolio Manager has aggregated a number of helpful resources, all related to benchmarking. So here you can get fact sheets, quick reference guides, more information on how the tool works. You can go sign up or view a previously recorded training, which we highly recommend, even if you've attended this one, because it goes a lot more in depth, walks you through each step. And if you join a live presentation, they are also there to help answer questions. An invaluable resource is their FAQs. They regularly update this. There are hundreds and hundreds of frequently asked questions. So if you have a question, I can almost guarantee it's answered in this FAQ section. So if you ever get stuck, I recommend starting there. They do a good job of outlining most of those FAQs. If you have a question related to your account, if there's something going wrong, something's glitching, something directly related to Portfolio Manager, you can submit a question to their help staff, which will take you here. You fill out their information, description of your issue, and they'll be able to provide you direct assistance, and they're quite timely in their responses, so that's another great tool. Okay, so that is the end of our live demonstration of Portfolio Manager. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and switch back over to our presentation. Okay, so got about 15 minutes left. Just want to cover a few more important components. One of the more important ones being, how is this data actually then sent to DOEE? Let's say you have entered all of your information, you've created your property in Portfolio Manager, entered all your property use details, 12 months of energy data, 12 months of water data, you've run all of the data quality checks, everything looks great. How does DOEE then see that data? Well, what you're going to do, and we're not going to walk through every step of the process, but I want to make sure that this is specifically called out. You must enroll your property in what DOEE calls automatic annual reporting, which means we are receiving your data directly from Portfolio Manager using their web services. So the best way to describe it is basically you send DOEE a friend request. So we actually connect our Portfolio Manager accounts together. And once that connection has been established, you then share your property with DOEE in a read-only mode. So we do not have the ability to edit any data, download anything that we're not supposed to see. We can't add, delete, nothing from your account. We're just able to see it and pull it into our system. So this is a really beneficial way of submitting your data because it only requires a one-time process. So assuming that you have a building between 25 and 50,000 square feet that has never benchmarked before, you would need to go through this process. But once you establish it now, you are well set up for all future reporting years, because then DOEE is able to automatically download your data and follow up with any questions or confirming compliance. So we have a number of resources, including a step-by-step reference guide and a specific recorded training video on how to do this. Again, those are linked in this presentation, so you'll be able to access them. But just really want to emphasize that it is not enough just to enter all your data in Portfolio Manager. It must be shared with DOEE. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to see all that hard work that you've put in. So I mentioned some additional resources. We covered that, how you can access them directly from Portfolio Manager. But again, wanted to call out that the Portfolio Manager 101 training is the best for buildings benchmarking for the first time. They offer them very frequently, or you can review a previously recorded held session It's directly linked here, or again, you can navigate there directly in Portfolio Manager from your account. DOEE specifically has a number of helpful resources. These are linked to our webpage here. We have our own specific FAQs that have to do with the district's benchmarking requirements. As I mentioned, we have a number of recorded webinars, including how to submit your data. And then also, if you are a building that has 5 or more energy meters, multi-tenant building, multifamily building, and want to learn more about how to enter whole building energy data, we have a specific webinar on that as well. So one final thing is, after all of that data has been submitted to DOEE, it is then publicly disclosed soon after the April 1st reporting deadline on our benchmarking disclosure map, as well as Open Data DC. So this is a screenshot of our benchmarking map. It actually recently just got a major revamp, so it's even more dynamic and provides a lot more information. And you can search for your data by year. Up here in the corner, you can change the calendar year view. You can search based on your specific property. You can look at, properties that receive a certain Energy Star score range or by property type. So it's a really helpful tool. But data is only disclosed after the building submits their second annual required report. So for you all, that means your 2021 calendar year data would not be disclosed, but every year after that would be. That's just how our law was written. And so you can go and view all of the data that's disclosed now for all the larger buildings, but your data would not be disclosed until 2023. And again, if you have any questions that aren't covered by the number of Portfolio Manager and DOEE resources, you can, of course, contact us directly. We have our email, building.performance@dc.gov. If you have interacted with us before, this email address might look a little bit different. We are moving, or have moved, to a new help desk system and online portal called Beam. And we have a number of our resources linked there as well. So you can click in directly to our help desk and actually submit tickets and forms. And we hope it's a much simpler and more streamlined process. But please note that if you have interacted with the info.benchmark or info.beps emails, that is now all integrated into this one building.performance@dc.gov. With that, I believe I'm handing it back over to Lindsey and Theresa.
Thanks, JoAnna. I'm actually going to kick over before we finish up or wrap up. I'm going to share some questions that have been popping up in the chat. One of the questions, can you just reiterate how people should go about sharing this information with DOEE?
Sharing the benchmarking data?
Yeah, the reporting requirements.
Yeah, and admittedly, we kind of glossed over it because it is a multi-step process, and we have a whole separate webinar on it specifically. But reporting the data is a 2-step process when you first enroll. So it first requires you to connect your account. So you would search for our Portfolio Manager account, send a connection request, that would get accepted. Once that's accepted, you would then share your property. And again, there's a whole list of steps of exactly what needs to be included, but you're essentially providing exchange read-only data where we're then able to see into your account, but not actually be able to edit anything. And that allows us to automatically pull data. And another great benefit is any changes that you make to your Portfolio Manager account are then automatically reflected in our database. It doesn't need to be resent at any point. And on April 1st every year thereafter, there is no need to manually send anything. We will be pulling the data and notifying you that we've received it. So you will still get confirmation that your data was received, but you do not have to do anything except update your data year over year.
And one more question for you, JoAnna. Can you please review again the best email practice for setting up the account?
Oh, yes. So what we highly recommend is making the email addresses associated with your Portfolio Manager account as generic as possible so that they can be accessed by as many people associated with the building as possible. And that's because, unfortunately, we've seen, one single staff member will use like their personal Gmail account to establish the portfolio manager account, they'll enter years worth of really great data, and then that person might leave. And then it's passed on, the responsibility of benchmarking is passed on to someone else. They don't have access to that former employee's personal email, and all of that data is lost, and a new account and report has to be created from scratch. And so in order to avoid that, we really recommend using a more generic email address, like general@company.com, that, the username and password can be shared, and it is also checked regularly, so you're never missing our correspondence, and so it can be recovered.
Thank you. And there was a lot of questions coming in. We will absolutely share this PDF, the presentation, the recording after the fact, and that what we'll do too is compile a lot of the links that JoAnna referenced in sort of a sequential order, so you'll understand what to click on first, what to go to next, and so forth. We know it's a lot of information, high level, and then getting into the technical details. So I just want to kind of double down on some of the high level why we're doing this piece, just to sort of frame it again into the larger context of the district is working really hard to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we can't manage what we don't measure, and that includes measuring the greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, and we measure that by benchmarking. And so the large buildings in the district have been doing this for just about 10 years now, and including private and publicly owned buildings, so DC's publicly owned buildings as well. And so those buildings now are under what JoAnna referenced as the building energy performance standards. So basically requiring certain energy thresholds for buildings. And so benchmarking and BEPS, the building energy performance standards, are separate but related requirements. And the benchmarking feeds BEPS. And so it's important to recognize that benchmarking affects you now in terms of what's being required, and BEPS will affect you soon. And so the reason we talk about both of these things is to understand the long term, what this all means and how it ties together. And completely understood that a lot of this feels like a lot of information, and so we will break it down for you. But I will say, to DOEE's credit and the EPA, there's a lot of information out there that's designed to help. We've got a slide at the end that will show you email addresses, people to reach out to help you with the process as well. And so with that, I also just want to share a few additional resources that we have on our website that can help sort of in this effort as well. So JoAnna, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So one of the resources we have on our site is common errors in benchmarking. So if you upload all of your information, and if you're just not at a place where you want to, or you can't hire someone to actually audit your data, we've compiled this resource which really outlines how to do a high-level check of your data to see if there are potential errors or how to look for anomalies. There are just certain numbers and values that are pretty typical within the district. And so basically what we've outlined is how to identify if your values fall outside of the norm. There could be very real reasons why they do, but it's just sort of us saying, just check to make sure that that's accurate. And then on the next slide, we also have a resource about understanding the data. So you're inputting all this data, it spits out some numbers, what does it all mean? And so we've got a guide that tells you what you can glean from actually looking at accurate benchmarking data and how it can actually help inform how your building is performing, where there are opportunities for energy savings. And so it's all about putting this information to good use. And that is really the larger intent of actually going through the exercise. So next slide. So just thank you guys for attending. I see there's another question that popped up. I'll see if I can pull it up quickly. Yes, we can tell you that. So yeah, so the last question, can you tell again where the property manager property ID comes from?
Yes, so the DC Real Property Unique ID, again, I know that's a mouthful, but that is your building's unique identifier that comes from tax record data. And so you might see this 8-digit number on your tax records. It might be on, sometimes your DC water bill, but it is compiled by DOEE every year on our covered building list. And we actually currently have a covered building list with those buildings 25 to 50,000 square feet. Just as a heads up, FYI, we think your building is going to be covered next year, but we will send out correspondence and publish that list in usually end of January, early February of the year reporting, so within the next few months. So I would recommend referencing that list if you're unsure, And then if you still have additional questions, of course, you can reach out to us and we can verify what that ID is. But it shouldn't change much year over year. So once you enter it into your portfolio manager account as associated with the property, you should be pretty well set up year over year. And that's how we are able to track your submissions.
And then another follow-up question that came in to reiterate. So for multifamily housing buildings where units, residential units are individually metered, what should people do to, what are they expected to do with all those individual meters?
Yes, great question. And this is very, very important. Again, because we know that you're not paying those bills, you're not seeing that usage directly, you would need to provide the actual physical energy meter number. So like when you see your meter bank at your property, you're recording all of the meter numbers listed and providing that directly to the utilities. So it's not the account numbers, it's the physical meter numbers. So hopefully this is information that you might have on hand already, but if not, it will require physically going to the property and recording it. And then that list of meter numbers is submitted to either PEPCO or Washington Gas. They take all of those meter numbers, associate it with the monthly usage, add it all up, and provide you one total aggregate number. And like I said, there's a lot of good resources on how to do that. We have a one-pager that outlines all the links, so hopefully that can be sent out in the follow-up with the recording and the slides as well. So if you own or manage or operate a multi-tenant building, I highly recommend you review that because it is a bit of a multi-step process, but again, once it's established, should be pretty simple year over year.
Great. I think, are there any last questions? I think that might be it for now, and then people can feel free. I know that there's some other sort of chatter floating around. We will do our best to answer those questions via a follow-up email. So we will take all of the slides, we'll take this as a recording, we'll send it all to you, we'll loop together some additional questions and follow up. And if you have further questions specific to your properties, please feel free to reach out. We're here to help. So thank you guys very much for attending today, for listening. I know it's a lot of information. We appreciate you hanging with us. And we're hoping to help make the process easier, especially if this is the first time that you're going about this process. So feel free to follow up, and we'll look forward to an email from us probably early next week with the rest of the information that we were just discussing. So with that, thank you all. Thank you, JoAnna. Thank you, Theresa. Thanks for everyone for joining. We'll be in touch
Thank you, everyone, and look forward to working with all of you and getting 100% submission and compliance for those smaller buildings. That's our goal here.